Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you, YouGov, for putting this on and for doing your research, which is extremely interesting reading. And it reinforces what I said actually at the Energy UK conference at the end of last year. Because I said then that this was a Fred the Shred moment for the energy companies. But I think we have still got a long way to go before we re-establish trust in this market, and I think the YouGov research also backs that up. Trust is really important in all markets, and it's important because if you don't have trust, people don't engage. The annual competition assessment that we commissioned, reported last week, I think highlighted the dangers. One of its major findings was this lack of trust, which was borne out in your research too, and it shows that if there isn't trust, people don't switch. Meaning they get stuck paying more than they need to. That new entrants to the market worry about reputational risk to their brand because of the poor view that people have of people in the energy market, and that of course is damaging for competition. So low trust levels can atrophy a market in those ways, and ultimately that means that consumers lose out. There is actually a difference between what people think and what the reality is, and that does come out again in the YouGov work. There is a big disconnect between what your polling shows about what people believe about the prices they pay and the reality. For example, your polling shows that only 8% of people think that UK energy prices are amongst the lowest in Europe, and half think they are the highest in Europe. Well, the fact is, the unit cost for UK households pay for gas is the lowest in the EU 15, some 20% below the average. Now we do pay more, consumers do pay more for their energy than consumers in the US, but they pay a lot less than consumers in Japan. 60% higher bills for gas and electricity in Japan compared to the UK. Between 2005 and 2010, energy bills rose by 63%. In this Parliament, the rises have continued at a slower rate. We've seen rises of 26% in the previous 3 years. So on average, that means there was 11% per year rise under the last government, 8% under this, and you can understand why consumers are worried. But it's frankly difficult to conclude that company profiteering by itself could explain this long rise, this sustained long rise in energy prices. And of course, in reality, the facts show that the biggest cause for the price rises has been the rise in wholesale prices over this period. Global energy demand is now twice as high as it was 30 years ago. The International Energy Agency estimates that it will grow by over a third again by 2035. And our policies really divide into sort of two time horizons. We've got the long-term policies as well as the short or medium-term policies. In the long term, clearly, if we're going to cushion consumers in our economy in the long term from volatile global markets and from rising energy demand elsewhere, we've got to have homegrown energy. We've got to invest in renewables. We've got to invest in nuclear. I believe we've got to invest in gas, including shale. The UK is becoming an energy investment hotspot. We're ranked first most attractive country to invest for offshore wind, second most attractive for biomass, and fifth most attractive for all renewables put together. And so there are what I call the 3 C's, the 3 C's of how we help people: with cash, with competition, and with consumption. But you may not know that the combination of Eco and Green Deal in the first year ensure that over 500,000 households got energy efficiency measures. In fact, 517,000 households last year got at least one energy efficiency measure as a result of either Eco or the Green Deal. The smart meter program, which we haven't spoken enough about, not least because it's in its early stages, the foundation stages, and companies like E.ON have been leading the way. That's going to be rolled out at the rest of this decade. And smart meters will give consumers in their home the information they need to be able to change their behaviour and save money. And products policy, again, something that doesn't get the consideration that it should. We've seen European standards really driving energy efficiency. I recently managed to persuade DEFRA and my good friend Owen Paterson to relinquish ministerial responsibility for products policy, and I'm now in charge of that. You'd have thought I might have been before, but I am as of a month ago, and watched this space. Even before I took control of products policy, I was looking at what we could do without regulation, and we've been talking, and we've actually been working with John Lewis on a trial, a sort of nudge, one of these nudge trials, where John Lewis, in half of its stores, with some of its big white goods, are putting next to the ticket price the lifetime running costs of those appliances, and in the other half of their stores they're not. And we'll be able to see when that trial concludes whether or not that sort of nudge has changed consumer behaviour to move them towards more energy efficient appliances. So there's a lot we can do on products policy to help people. The big six are now challenged in the domestic retail energy market by 18 independent suppliers, 11 of which have entered the market since 2010 when we deregulated. The market share of the independent suppliers has gone up from less than 1% to 5% and rising, and I think that competition effect is really showing. We've worked with Ofgem to make tariffs simpler, less confusing, bill formats clearer. We're trying to speed up switching times, working with our colleagues in Energy UK and other parts of the industry. And we're seeing, having seen a reduction in switching, as doorstep selling was ended by the big six because of all the problems around mis-selling that we saw with doorstep selling, that has significantly reduced switching. We're now seeing switching go up again in the right direction because of all the measures we've taken. So 1.3 million people actually switched electricity supplier last year. That was in the final quarter of last year, I should say. That's up 34% on the year ago, and over 800,000 changed their gas supplier, up 43% on the previous year. We've got a way to go, but we are seeing that beginning to work. Politicians have to work with the industry and other stakeholders to try to rebuild trust, because that's in everyone's interest, most of all the consumer. And sometimes politicians undermine this trust in what they do and what they say. And the challenge we have in energy, not just to help people with their bills, but also to keep the lights on and to decarbonise, is a huge historic challenge. And I would say that the levy control framework, which is our sort of budget for investing in low carbon electricity production, is itself a technology budget, because we're giving more of that budget to the immature technologies, like offshore wind, like carbon capture and storage, indeed like technologies like tidal and marine. We're more generous to those than we are to the more mature low carbon like solar and onshore wind. And I think that's a sensible thing to do. It's helping drive innovation in the private sector, and indeed we do quite a lot of funding of CCS innovation and indeed offshore wind innovation through the catapults organisations. Energy efficiency in many ways is one of the key things that we can do. It's the cheapest form of energy because it's energy you don't use. And if you look at the challenges that we face to really make big strides forward in energy efficiency, regulations actually can drive markets, standards can drive markets quicker than incentives or other things. And I had the pleasure a while back of sitting next to, and I'm going to name drop now, Professor Stephen Chu. He ought to be a hero of many people. He's a Nobel Prize-winning professor of physics. He was Obama's previous energy secretary. And he argues, and the Department of Energy argue in the States, that if we had a global standard for ultra energy efficient appliances, products, televisions, computers and so on, that would be the equivalent of 600 power stations.
Energy is political. Choices about where and how we source our energy, how it's bought and sold, how we reconcile competing interests, of which in energy there are many, these are fundamentally political, and there are fundamentally political decisions to be made. Decisions about how people should live, who gets what, how resources are distributed. It's a dialogue. It's a permanent conversation open to challenge and question. And it's exciting and vital precisely because people disagree. Now, I know there are some of you that say you'd like to see politics taken out of energy policy. But in an area where everyone has an interest, there's got to be someone to arbitrate on the public interest. And as long as politicians bear responsibility for keeping the lights on, and for as long as their constituents care about their energy bills, politics is inescapable in energy policy. And although the public's trust in politicians may only be marginally better than that in energy companies, the public's appetite for hands-on involvement by government to fix what's broken is strong, as is the support for the price freeze. If we can't make the trade-offs, resolve the issues and answer the challenges through the political process, where can we? Because ultimately, competition will only work if companies are constrained by the fear of losing customers if they increase their prices too much. But consumers will only be prepared to engage in the market, to invest their time and effort to secure the best deal, if they believe the market is fair and if there are proper rules in place to prevent them being ripped off. There are things now that we could do to improve this market, to make it work better for consumers, then that work starts now. And it goes to the heart of how and why the relationship between the energy industry, politicians, and consumers needs to change. Because consumers, and politicians for that matter, will only be able to trust the energy industry when they can see it works in the public interest. And I predict this market will change. It will be reformed. The public will feel that they pay a fair price for their energy. And perhaps, after that painful but necessary process of reform, some of the companies will thank us for helping to restore the public's trust in their industry. But if we're to take the country with us on that journey, people have to have faith in this market and the regulation that underpins it. Reading some of the things people in the industry have said to YouGov about how they are perceived by the public, I was reminded of what I think is one of the single biggest obstacles to proper reform in this sector. Some energy companies, some individuals, like to think the reason they get a bad press is because the media and politicians unfairly give them a hard time. To be honest, there's people in my own party, and I'm sure in other political parties, like to blame the media when they're not getting the poll ratings that they expect, and I've never signed up to that type of attitude. What we are doing is reflecting what we've heard from our own constituents and from the many people who talk to us, from NGOs and others, about the real feelings that people have about the way they're treated by this sector. If energy companies don't want to get a bad press, they shouldn't charge some customers more than others. They shouldn't hang on to people's direct debit overpayment. They shouldn't pass on wholesale cost increases but not the reductions. And until energy companies face up to that and stop blaming other people, the public will not trust them. So if this industry can be reformed, if you can treat your customers better and open yourselves up to greater scrutiny, if you can show that you are doing everything within your power to shield your customers against rising prices, then that puts a responsibility on consumers to do everything that they can to manage their energy usage, and on us politicians to take the right decisions for the country and to explain our choices to the public. Occasionally, the energy industry has a very unappealing habit of sounding like it feels sorry for itself. But ultimately, the people who lose out most of all from the lack of trust in the energy industry aren't the energy company boards or senior management. It's their customers and their staff for that matter. Britain is a great place to do business in, to invest in, not least compared to other countries. For all the disagreements and differences of opinion there may be, this is a country where there is still a broad consensus about energy policy, a consensus on the need to decarbonise, a consensus about the need for investment and the process by which we'll secure it.